Alright, so this game is a surprise to me. Total War Pharaoh. I had seen something about leaks. I'd seen that Crib Assembly had themselves accidentally leaked the game by having a listing for it on their website, but I hadn't looked into the leaks too much. The announcement of a trailer here is kind of surprising to me, though, as there's going to be one more Total War Warhammer DLC this summer before one at the very, very end of the year, if not the beginning of next year. And Crib Assembly does not like to cannibalize their own market. So they try to market one thing at a time. So I figured Pharaoh would probably be around the gap between the summer DLC and the winter DLCs for Warhammer. But here's the trailer. Now, I'm not expecting a whole lot here. The thumbnail for the video looked like it would be a cinematic trailer, not gameplay. Now, cinematics can say plenty. Particularly, the question is, the title of the game is Total War Pharaoh. Not Total War Saga's Pharaoh, Total War Pharaoh. Which, Total War Troy, at the end of the trailer for Mythos, played up the... Not the trailer for Mythos. The trailer for the DLC, the last DLC, featuring Memnon and the Thracian dude, whose name escapes me, showed a pan up, and it showed on the sky there was the Egyptian gods, which implied that either there was going to be another DLC for Mythos, evidently not, for Troy, adding the Egyptians, beyond Memnon, I mean, or if there was going to be a new Total War Sagas game based around Egypt and its mythology, which evidently it's not Sagas. Evidently, the next historical entry was just simply going to be Egypt. But if it's not a Sagas game, that means it needs to be on the size, pretty well, of like Rome 2 or Three Kingdoms, which are both pretty big games. And Egypt is a place you can definitely zoom in on Egypt and focus more on smaller regions along the Nile, the kingdoms on the Nile. After all, Troy, focuses pretty intently on Greece and Western Anatolia. And it has a very big map, even though it's covering a much smaller region of the world than, for instance, Rome 2 did. Because Rome 2 covers Greece just the same as Troy does, except that Greece in Rome 2 is probably like, 4 regions? While in Troy, it's like 200. So, there's a possibility here that it could just be all Egyptian factions, similar to Three Kingdoms, and it's intently focused just on the Nile and the kingdoms on it, and we get 200 different Egyptian regions. But that wouldn't be too terribly exciting, would it? It's a possibility. Like I said, they did it with Three Kingdoms, and they did it with Shogun 2 long before, of having Total War games where it's just a war of the same culture, just one culture, fighting amongst itself. With Three Kingdoms, they added more later on, but even then, the Yellow Turbans weren't too crazy. The other possibility is that this is just kind of an exploration of the whole Bronze Age era, which is not a historical era I'm very up on at all. But even with that one, I feel like exploring particularly the North African Middle East region during the Bronze Age could perhaps be religiously controversial for some folks. Especially if they want to go down the Mythos route, which I assume they do. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and start the trailer, enough of me speculating. Oh, that's gorgeous. They're such weird animals. Oh! Ball of dung. Okay. So it's Khepri. It's a reference to the Egyptian god Khepri. Lower that volume a little bit. And he's pushing the dung ball over a Kapesh. Forget about Total War between humans. How do I get a Total War game about beetles fighting over dung balls? That sounded about as much as I expected. That is to say, nothing. Let's see. It is going to be launching on Steam. Okay, we're not talking a Total War Troy situation. Now what we do is we check the Total War blog. And nothing's uploaded on the Total War blog. Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording for a little bit and see if there isn't some other news out there. Because that was a bit underwhelming. If there isn't other news, I guess we'll just come back and start speculating again. My buddy Soon was kind enough to provide me with a link to an IGN article. A little bit odd for Crave Assembly to reveal this information through IGN instead of their own blog, but I suppose they wanted to have this shown on more of a grand scale than they were capable of just through their own website. So, it'll be taking place 3 great cultures as they fight for survival amid the Bronze Age collapse. It's ancient Egypt, blah, 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 marketing words. Now, the 3 great factions, oh, I see. Let's see. You can choose from 8 faction leaders, as they say about charming courts, charging into battle, causing chaos. The Egyptian factions of Ramses, Seti, Tausret, and Amenmesi. Canaanites of Bay and Ursu, and the Hittites of Kurunta and Supiliuma. There we go. The Canaanites, I was a little bit wondering about that with the idea of hitting the Bronze Age stuff, because aren't they considered fairly important to some religions as a negative people thought of not very highly? These are some nice looking maps. These are some interesting looking siege maps. But yeah, it's not a whole lot of information. It does not look like. The decision to only focus on 3 factions is interesting, so it probably is going to be a pretty intense focus. A very zoomed-in map on just the Nile, Egypt, and maybe a little bit of the southwestern Arabian Plateau. Not plateau, peninsula, there we go. Arabian Peninsula, because that'll probably be where the Canaanites start. Well, no, it'll probably... The Hittites were on Anatolia, right? Oh, I don't know my Bronze Age history at all. I don't know it at all. I could be dead wrong about that. The Hittites could be in Japan, for all I know. So, I guess I couldn't say then where the map is. It includes a franchise-first campaign customization feature that ensures unique conquest on every run. Players can randomize the start positions for all factions, alter resource settings, increase the chance of natural disasters, and so on. So we're keeping the resource system from Troy, I am willing to bet. Alter resource settings. Because that was the number one thing that everybody walked away from Troy saying was the great thing about Troy's campaign, was the differing resource types. And Pharaoh is not going to be set much closer to the present than Troy would, so having an entirely money-based economy wouldn't make that much sense anyways. The ability to randomize start positions is neat. That's a very popular mod for Warhammer. So, kind of makes me wonder if after Pharaoh releases, they might go backwards and add the feature to Warhammer as well. That would be curious. If we pre-order it, we get an early access weekend, an Avatar of the Gods cosmetic pack, and Heart of the Shardana cosmetic pack. Cosmetic packs. Are we doing the Crusader Kings thing where everybody starts out with the same bland-looking units and you have to pay for them to look different, or are we doing something like having Shogun 2 Avatar battles? That's curious. Base game costs $60, Deluxe Edition costs $72, and Dynasty Edition, all 3 DLC faction packs. Okay, DLC factions, are those just going to be other Egyptian dynasties, or are they going to be extra cultures? That's an interesting question. I know so little about the Bronze Age, I don't know what's going on with any of this. They also haven't made clear if there's going to be a Mythos expansion, but that seems like something you would advertise if it was going to be the case. Which implies to me that there is not Mythos. If there is not Mythos, then it will just be... Just tab over, don't want to see stupid YouTube recommendations. If it's not going to be Mythos, and it's just going to be historically accurate Bronze Age, North Africa, well, really more so the Middle East, then that'll be very classically Total War, but it'll be surprising, because it seemed like Crave Assembly has, as of late, tried to turn their historical games into fantasy games. as an attempt to increase sales and to increase broad appeal, because a game that is expressly just a historical simulator, it's kind of got a niche audience, I suppose. But if they are confident in this working, then I can respect that. I mean, it's Total War. I'm going to buy it. It's a guarantee. I've bought every Total War so far up until now. I believe the only 2 Total War things I don't own are 2 DLCs for Attila. I believe I don't own a few of the faction packs, and I don't own the last Roman campaign. That's it. So I'm going in on this. I always do. I don't know about going in on it at launch. I suppose we'll have to see how it gets hyped up. But for me, this is interesting. It's probably going to be more educational than anything. Because like I said, I know very little about Bronze Age anything. It's never really been my jam. I've never been a big Greco-phile or a big Egyptophile. That's probably the incorrect word for that. That sounds like a slur. I've never been big on any of that. The extent of my Bronze Age knowledge is that I once took a class on the Old Testament. And if we are going to cover Anatolia, the space going from Anatolia to Egypt, it's going to be weird if Israel is there and not playable. But I was joking with Soon the other day, because Soon's been very excited. My buddy Soon, he has been very, very excited for this. He is a big fan of the Bronze Age. And we were talking about this, and I was saying Israel would be a really fun, interesting culture to expand into. However, at the same time, it would be a very controversial one. So, I joked that maybe Israel on this map will be grayed out like Athel Loren used to be in Warhammer 1, or like Koresh and End are in Warhammer 3. And if that would be the case, that would be hilarious. And still kind of offensive on its own, but it would also be hilarious. If Israel was the pre-order DLC, I think that would probably make the most sense. But I'm curious to see that. Because I don't know very much about the Canaanites or the Hittites or even the Egyptians. But I would actually be pretty interested in playing Bronze Age Israel. That'd be pretty neat. I'm curious how the gameplay is going to work out, because they had a pretty good take on how to do cavalryless warfare in Troy. Though with handling Egyptian warfare, it's all about the chariots. So I wonder if they're going to make a unique balance around chariots. Especially because Egyptian warfare, it wasn't just about the chariots, it was about shooting from a chariot. It was about archers on chariots. Total War tends to not go for ranged chariots too strongly, in my experience, which is admittedly pretty limited when it comes to the historical games, and is majority concentrated on the fantasy games. But chariot archers have never been too good in Total War, in my experience. Usually when you get chariots in Total War, you want to use them to ram through infantry formations. So if they rebalance the way chariot archers work to make them a bit more viable as simply range tools, as skirmishing tools, which to my understanding is how real-world Egyptian warfare worked, that'd be pretty interesting. But I believe that's pretty well all I can say for the game, as like I said, I'm not a big bronze warfare expert. Let me look at this siege map again. We've got siege tools, oh my god. We have buildable ladders. We have buildable ladders. That may be the biggest news here. Oh, those are gorgeous buildings there. That looks kind of like a film studio. That's a very nice palace. But we have buildable ladders. Are we going backwards on the ladders hidden inside the butt technique of designing sieges? Because that would be interesting. I would think Crib Assembly would never go back on buildable ladders. I thought for certain Crib Assembly was going to keep the so-called ass ladders for the rest of the Total War franchise's history, because it was believed, and somewhat for good reason, that many new players would be confused by the fact that they couldn't attack walls without building siege equipment. But the reintroduction of buildable ladders is a big balance change for sieges that would make sieges a lot more interesting. And again, me being the big fantasy guy, I would love to see that backwards ported to Warhammer, because that would make Warhammer sieges much more enjoyable. But at the same time, I can definitely see Crib Assembly treating Pharaoh as being a more hardcore title for more hardcore Total War fans. Maybe a little bit of a send-up to the old-school historical fans who have for so long been so displeased with the fantasy direction. while they let the historical gamers, the big Total War hardcore fans, have Pharaoh, they continue to treat Warhammer as a casual game. I would not be shocked if that's the strategy. And so Warhammer continues to have these simplified mechanics and features, even if it is to the detriment of the game's balance. That's curious. That's good that I actually clicked on that real quick at the end there, because that is interesting. Okay, let me close this little thing here and go ahead and wrap the recording. Thank you for seeing this. I guess it's early in the morning. I just woke up not too long ago, and I was not expecting to record anything like this today, so caught me a little off guard. But regardless, I will see you folks whenever my next video comes out, I guess. See ya. It always takes me too long to hit the stop recording button.